It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the films of December 22nd, 1995. And of course, like I said yesterday, we have 10 movies overall to look at, but considering that the next week there's only 2 movies, basically we have 8 this week and then 2 the next week. I'm going to split this up into two parts. So we're going to look at the first 5 movies from this particular weekend this week, and then the next episode we'll look at the other 5 movies, including the 2 new releases for that week. So we have a lot to look at, so let's just get right to it. And we'll start off with the comedy sequel, Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau together again in Grumpier Old Men. Did you like the first Grumpy Old Men? You probably will like this one. I mean, it's pretty much that type of a movie. It's pretty much the same movie as the first film, but, I mean, the first movie was okay. It was a decent little comedy. Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau working off each other. That's usually good for comedy gold. You have Anne Margaret again in this. You also have Kevin Pollak and Daryl Hannah back in here once again. Burgess Meredith is back in here. The new addition of Sophia Loren, who comes into this. And, I mean, really, there's not much more I can really say about this one because it is pretty much just the first movie again, except they add Sophia Loren's character into this, and I guess there's a little bit more comedy there, but not really. It's kind of, like I said, it's pretty much the same movie as the first one, except instead of taking place in the winter, this takes place in the fall. And it's really something where you have to look at this and go, did you like the first movie? Because if you did, you might enjoy this one too. It's nothing too spectacular, but the first movie wasn't that spectacular either. It was still a fun movie, and I think this is still a very fun movie just because it's Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau working off each other again. And I think that's one of the main reasons why this film still works. I mean, it's not a great movie. It's not even a good sequel, honestly, but the first movie was just okay. I feel like this one's on the same level, too. It's a comfort food movie. These 2 movies are very much comfort food movies. You go in there not expecting a whole lot, but you go in there knowing that you're going to see Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau making you laugh, and it does a pretty good job of it. Like, it's for the time, it works for what it is. It works very much for what it is. Nothing spectacular, nothing too crazy, but it's still a fun sequel. If you like the first one, you're definitely going to like the second one. So, that's Grumpier Old Men. Let's take a look now at the next movie that we have here, and that is Waiting to Exhale. So this was a movie that was kind of a big deal, obviously, for a number of reasons. I mean, one, you have Whitney Houston in her first film after The Bodyguard, and Angela Bassett, who had won Rays a couple years ago for What's Love Got to Do with It. You also have Loretta Devine in here, a great character actress, and Lena Rochon, who was previously in Boomerang, if I'm not mistaken. She was also in Harlem Nights, and she wasn't as well known as the other 3 actresses in this movie, but I mean, the real reason why this movie does work, honestly, is because they got 4 really good actresses to work off each other, and their chemistry is very good. Like, the casting overall in this movie is really good. Not only just them, but you also have Dennis Haysbert, Michael Beach, Gregory Hines, Donald Faison, McLetty Williamson, Forrest Whitaker. This is his first movie he's directed, and the score is done by Babyface, Ken Babyface Edmonds. It's not really anything that spectacular. It is basically kind of it is really much a chick flick, but compare this to something like the more recent 80 for Brady, which I badmouth that movie for obvious reasons because that was that's a bad chick flick where you're not paying attention to what's on screen. You're paying attention to what your friends are wearing and all that kind of stuff. It's that kind of a movie, and it tricks men into thinking that it's going to be something interesting because it's got Tom Brady in it. I'm basically just using this time to bash that movie because it's still one of the worst movies, the worst movie of the year so far. But my point is, chick flicks can actually be good even if you're a guy. Like, I watched this movie, I wasn't really expecting a whole lot from it, but I thought it was all right. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it did have its lasting impact. There are moments in this movie that you still see nowadays in like memes and all that kind of stuff, scenes that are still very much well remembered in this movie. I mean, it's just a movie that has had that following. I mean, they make jokes about it back in the 90s. The Simpsons made the great joke about, did you get Waiting to Exhale? Marge was asking if they got Waiting to Exhale from the video store, and Homer was just like, well, they put us on the Waiting to Exhale waiting list, and they said, don't push your luck. It's just like, this movie did have a following back then. I mean, yeah, but I think what the biggest takeaway is from this movie is the 4 leading actresses. Whitney Houston gives another really good performance. It shows that, hey, she was actually a really good actress back then. Angela Bassett, I mean, what more I need to say about Angela Bassett. Loretta Devine is a great actress that every time I see her in something, I usually will go and see it because I do like her work. And I like Lela Rochon in here. I do like her in this movie. And I think everybody here does their parts very well. It's not a great story overall. It kind of falls into predictable territory, but it's perfectly fine for what it is. It's a solidly made movie. It's a well-made film that I think if you go into it with the right note, if you're a guy and you have no real interest in these chick flicks, I think you could watch this one day and be like, it actually wasn't half bad. That's kind of what I felt like about it. Like, it's a solid film. It's not one I'd watch over and over again, but I'm glad I saw it. I mean, I'm glad that I did watch it and I did get some value out of it. But I think, yeah, this is definitely a chick flick, but a decent chick flick, honestly. So, that's Waiting to Exhale. Let's move on to the next movie that we have here, and that is Disney's second attempt at the Huckleberry Finn story, Tom and Huck. I mean, the interesting thing about this movie is, one, they actually made another story about Huckleberry Finn because they just did one 2 years prior. But the same director who did that movie, Stephen Sommers, actually was one of the writers on here, as was David Lowery, who's written some other works as well. So you basically have John Travolta. That'd be a much different movie if it was John Travolta. Jonathan Taylor Thomas and Brad Renfro. This was when Disney was trying to make him the next big movie star, and needless to say, that really didn't work out so well. This one obviously takes itself much more seriously than The Adventures of Huck Finn, but obviously I think The Adventures of Huck Finn is a much better movie. With this film, however, it's just kind of like, I get what you're trying to do. I get you're trying to make a comedy out of this, but comedy still has to be funny, and there's not really a whole lot of interesting comedy in this movie. I mean, Jonathan Taylor Thomas and Brad Renfro, I guess, are okay in this, but they're not really given a whole lot to do here. It's just basically, let's just take everything from Tom Sawyer, kind of add the Mark Twain book, and just make a modernized period piece film. Which there's modern bits of comedy in here, but I will say that it's not on the levels of something as bad as something like A Kid in King Arthur's Court, but it's a largely forgettable movie, to say the least. And even with that short that they show at the beginning, they just basically took an episode of the Timon and Pumbaa cartoon series and just plastered it on the big screen. And it's a funny musical short that they did, but you could just wait for it to come on TV in a couple of months, or even wait for it to come out on video, because they put it on videos of different Disney movies at the beginning. So what was the point of even putting it on the big screen if you're not even going to do anything about it? At least with the Animaniacs short, that one at least looked like it was trying to be a little bit more cinematic than the show, but I don't know. I don't know what the decision was, but the short, I think, was very funny overall, but it's no Runaway Brain. It's no, it's none of these other shorts that I've talked about before, but, I mean, it still probably would be the best thing you would get from this package. Tom and Huck, the movie itself, I don't think was really all that great, so anyway, let's move on to the next movie, and that is Jean-Claude Van Damme, starring in Sudden Death. So I know what you're thinking. Yeah, it's another Die Hard clone, but you know what? It's still one of the best Die Hard clones out there, if there's any consolation to it. But then again, this is also one of Jean-Claude Van Damme's best movies, if not the best movie, I think, from him. I think it's still his strongest film overall, but then again, maybe it's because I have a soft spot for this because I'm from near Pittsburgh, and this was filmed at the Civic Arena, which was then the home of the Pittsburgh Penguins, and there's a lot of Pittsburgh Penguins stuff in here. The team they're facing is the Washington Capitals. The announcers are the Penguins announcers, and it's been gone. It's been replaced with PPG Paints Arena, but still seeing this take place in a familiar area, that's maybe why I kind of like this movie. It's kind of the same thing that I had with Striking Distance. I mean, Striking Distance is not a good movie, but I have a kind of a soft spot for it because it was filmed around Pittsburgh. But I think what's very interesting about this particular film is that when they were making this movie in the early production stages, it was actually supposed to be a comedy. Like, the scene where Van Damme fights the Pittsburgh Penguins mascot was something that was in the original comedic script, but they said, screw it, we're just going to keep it in the final cut of the movie. It's ridiculous, but it's still pretty damn entertaining, and really there's no point in criticizing the story overall because it does feel like a Die Hard clone, except it takes place in a sports arena, so it's kind of more like in the lines of something like 2-Minute Warning and Black Sunday, those 70s sports thrillers that take place in a sports arena. But I will say some of the action sequences are just incredible to look at. Like, you can tell that they do put some time and effort into these creative action sequences. Like, you get these like the end of the movie really does a good job of keeping you on the edge of your seat. Like you have scenes where Jean-Claude Van Damme has to make sure that he has to check and see if the game is going to go to overtime or get these people out of there. There's a part where he goes on the top of the arena and has to jump through these lights, grab these lights and everything to get to the terrorist played by Powers Booth, who's a fun over the top villain. Even when it gets really, really corny at times, because it will get very corny, like the final climax where Powers Booth ends up dying, there's a shot where Jean-Claude Van Damme is looking at this helicopter, and it looks so fake, it's so cheesy, but I'll give them credit, though. They really just said, yeah, we're going to keep it like this. So it's like, I love how it acknowledges the cheesiness as well, but also acknowledges that it wants to make a fun movie. I mean, the effort is definitely there, putting these action sequences in. And the music overall is very good. John Debney does a very good job with this Michael Kamen-esque Die Hard score that he has here. Yeah, Sudden Death is not a great movie, but it's a fun-as-hell action film. It's one of the best Die Hard clones, and arguably the best Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. It's the one I will watch over and over again. Great action, nicely done effects for the most part. Even when the corny stuff happens, it's still very funny. It's a fun approach to a then cliche concept, and even after all these years, it's still very much fun to watch, and certainly a whole lot better than Welcome to Sudden Death, which if you've never seen that movie, it's probably a good reason why you should never see that movie. So anyway, Sudden Death, that's that one. Let's move on to the last movie of this particular episode, and that is Anthony Hopkins starring in Oliver Stone's Nixon. Trust me, that's one of the shortest trailers you will see for this movie. I swear, if you go online and look for trailers for this, there's trailers that are almost 4 hours long. The movie itself is around 4 hours long, pretty much, but there's trailers on here that are like 4 minutes long that were in theaters, and it gives away a ton of what the movie's about. And very interestingly, that this came out only a year and a half after Richard Nixon passed away. Like, he had died in 1994, and then they just said, let's make the movie now. I mean, and Oliver Stone, I mean, he works very well in this type of situation. I mean, he did JFK, and that was a great movie. This is probably the last movie of his golden peak, and even then, this is probably the lesser of the movies he's made, but I still think it's a very solid film. Like, I like the way that he portrays Nixon as kind of this complex character, and the movie even begins with a disclaimer saying that this is an attempt to understand the truth based on numerous public sources and on an incomplete historical record. It's a very interesting take on that, and the casting overall is great. You have a ton of great talent here. Hopkins, Joan Allen playing his wife, Annabeth Gish, Marley Shelton, Bai Ling, Powers Booth, J.T. Walsh, E.G. Marshall, James Woods, Paul Sorvino, Bob Hoskins, Larry Hagman, Ed Harris, David Hyde Pierce. They kind of use that splicing technology that Forrest Gump used to put Anthony Hopkins' character in archival footage. And, you know, it was an interesting time back then. And this is actually the second of Oliver Stone's 3 films about the American presidency, because, of course, he made JFK. Then he would follow this up 13 years later with W, which was, we'll get to that one later. I thought it was alright, but it was a movie that definitely was the lesser of the 3 films. I do like what Oliver Stone does in this case, presenting this interesting portrayal of Richard Nixon that many people don't really talk about when they talk about Richard Nixon. Like, he was a little bit of a complex guy. Like, he made decisions that he had to do to keep his job, and it's a very interesting situation, and I think that the movie does a very good job of presenting it in this unique way. Like no matter who you really are, if you didn't like Nixon, if you like Nixon, I think you can get a lot out of this movie, and I think it's because Anthony Hopkins just plays this character so well in this movie. It's a very good film. Definitely not one of Oliver Stone's best films overall, but it's still a really solid film. Like, if you want to see peak Oliver Stone, this is definitely one of the last great films he did in that little stretch era that started his career before he kind of nosedived a little bit after this. But, yeah, like I said, Nixon's a pretty decent film. So that wraps up this episode. Next time around, we'll wrap 1995 up with the other 5 movies that we'll talk about, including the 2 new releases for this week. 12 Monkeys by Terry Gilliam with Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt, and also Dead Man Walking with Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins. We also look at Balto, the animated film from Universal, Mel Brooks' Dracula Dead and Loving It, and the infamous pirate bomb, Cutthroat Island. So we'll wrap 1995 up on the next episode. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, hit the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode. I will see you guys tomorrow for another episode. So, thanks for watching, I'll see you next time, and until then, as always, take care.